Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, March 20th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about which senators might be next to retire ahead of the 2022 midterm elections. Now, retirements are always a great indicator of how the year is going to go. It pretty much tells us which political party believes that they are going to lose seats or that their party may no longer be a representation of how they believed, these senators believed when they were first elected into office. And looking at the 2022 Senate map. So far, we've only seen Republican retirements, which sort of indicates, at least initially, that this isn't going to be a red wave year. Now, of course, it's way too early to make that conclusion, but there are warning signs here. The same warning signs we saw ahead of 2018 and the same warning signs we saw ahead of 2020 that possibly Joe Biden and the Democratic Party might be able to ride out this wave. However, I will warn you that every single midterm year in the 21st century, the Democratic Party looks as if they are on track to win it. I'm serious. Looking at the political polls, the generic ballot in 2010, the Democrats were up double digits a year out, and then ultimately ended up losing. In 2014, the Democratic Party was in a very similar position, leading throughout the entire year of 2013. Once 2014 hit, it was like a switch, and the Republican Party took a lead and ultimately kept that momentum leading into the election. And looking at the 2022 Senate map, right now what we're starting to see is that the Democratic Party seems at an initial advantage, but it's too early to tell whether or not this initial advantage will continue, and if it does, then you can sort of conclude that it won't be a red wave year, or if it's just this this warning sign that, the GOP may be in trouble, but it's still reversible. So looking at our Senate map, let's go ahead and fill it out based off of our current party composition. This pretty much just means which parties hold certain races, and that comes down to a lot of states that were decided in 2016. There's only 2 races on here that were decided in 2020, and that was due to special elections, and I'm sure you can guess which ones, but if you can't, it's Georgia and Arizona. Those were 2 Republican seats. In fact, if I made those seats red, it would be the same composition by number that it was back in 2016 when this Senate map was up. So on your screen now, you have the 50-50 tie that I'm sure you've heard of by now, with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking the tie. Now, with these retirements, as I had said, there were no Democratic retirements as of the production of this video, but there is the potential for one Democratic retirement, I think, as of right now. I can't imagine too many others unless some senators want to go into the private sector or just really don't want to serve anymore. Ultimately, I'm expecting every single Democrat to run because, number one, besides this one senator that I'm going to mention, I can't imagine too many of them think that this won't be a good year for them because of the states that they're in. On top of that, the Democratic Party is, I'm sure, going to keep in Mark Kelly, Raphael Warnock, Catherine Cortez Masto, Michael Bennet, just for the sure factor of having the incumbency lead into the race on in November 2022. So what we're going to be seeing is just discussion of which retirements could be indicators versus ones that are just pretty much formalities and really mean absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. But let's get started. So with the 5 retirements that we know so far, I'm sure that you know that the senators that voted for Donald Trump were completely vilified by President Trump. But what you might be interested to know is that 2 of those senators that voted to convict President Trump on the ballot are actually retiring, which means that they aren't too worried about a re-election bid. They aren't worried about the future of their legacy because, at the end of the day, they're leaving on their own terms. They're not being ousted by the voters. They're not being primaried. They're not being campaigned against by the former president. They're out. They don't care, right? And the remaining 5 are pretty much either up in 2024 or 2026. The only Republican senator that isn't retiring that is up in 2022 that voted to convict President Trump is Lisa Murkowski. And after ranked choice voting was introduced to her state and passed, I don't think she's vulnerable. So these 2 retirements, I think, go to show that maybe some of these Republicans that had intentions of retiring or that if they were on their way out, they might have considered voting to convict President Trump the same way Pat Toomey did and Richard Burr did. But that's not the main focus of this video, so we're going to move on. But just keep that in mind when you're looking at some of these retirements. And look at the states. Pennsylvania and North Carolina are absolutely swing states. I don't have the 2020 election results up. I didn't think it was needed, but you would know that those states were decided by less than 2 points each. So both of those states are considered to be retirement states. And then the next state is the state of Ohio. It's neighboring to the state of Pennsylvania. It's traditionally competitive, but Donald Trump has had some very strong luck here, but not better luck than Rob Portman. Certainly not. Rob Portman won by 21 points back in 2016. Donald Trump won by 8. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the state. Removing an incumbent who has had a lot of crossover support, that brings us back to a more polarized state. The Republican Party surely has the advantage, but not as much nearly as they did under Rob Portman. So that's 3 retirements. The next one is Senator Roy Blunt in the state of Missouri. Now, if you recognize his name, it's because you should. He is someone who ran in 2016 and nearly lost. In fact, only won by 2.8% against Jason Kander, a statewide official that defied all expectations and came much closer than Hillary Clinton. Keep in mind, Donald Trump won the state by 18, 19 points. Roy Blunt only won by 3 on the same ballot. 3 is a rounding up number. So looking at what happened in Missouri, ultimately, the Democratic Party did phenomenal. And, I don't think that this race is going to be super competitive in 2022, but I don't think it'll be considered safe because Roy Blunt will no longer be the incumbent. And considering the potential lineup for the GOP, they could go wrong and they could go right. So I'm going to wait until the primary until I remove it out of the likely R characterization unless we see some new data out of the state. But overall, it's a retirement state. So that's number 4. Number 5 comes from a state that we really don't need to be discussing too intensively. It's the state of Alabama. I know it really had some shocking results back in 2017. I live streamed that event. But looking at Alabama's movement, it's not going to be a blue state again. That was just a very, very, very particular situation and a perfect storm for Democrats. A perfect storm for Democrats. But ultimately, they ended up losing that race in 2020 by 20 points. So that is 5 retirements here. Where are the next ones? Could we see more than 5? Absolutely. Could we see them in swing states? Absolutely again. So I want to bring your attention to the first state that I think could have a retirement. And since we were just talking about Republicans, let's talk about my Democratic senator here that I think that we should be talking about for a potential retirement. Now, Patrick Leahy has filed paperwork to run for Senate. He filed it in Vermont, as did the rest of these senators with the exception of one that I'm going to show you. But pretty much he has said that he hasn't fully decided on whether or not he's going to run. But he's filed the paperwork in the event that he does, the same way that David Perdue did in Georgia and then ultimately decided not to run a week later. The reason why people are bringing this up is because this will be his 9th term. He's been in the Senate since 1975. Come the inauguration of 2025, you'll need to realize that that will be 50 years in the Senate. 50 years in the Senate. That is a very long time. That is a very, very long time. Looking at the state's electoral history, I have no doubt the Democrats would be very strong contenders here. If anything, the strongest. But I don't think that looking at Patrick Leahy's just seniority, that it will, number one, be the most beneficial thing for the Democratic Party if they're trying to break away from this narrative of establishment politics and, traditional old white men politics. And even though, of course, that sounds very hypocritical, right, with Joe Biden in office, I think the Democratic Party is really trying to reshape what they're doing. And Vermont is a perfect state to do it, I think. Vermont's very progressive nature. I think that they could certainly find someone who is younger but still holds the same ideology as Patrick Leahy, who arguably isn't one of the more progressive members of the Senate, but is someone who is popular in Vermont. Back in 2016, he won by a very large amount. He was able to win with 61% of the vote. And looking at Scott Milne, I believe that he ran for another thing, I think so he ran in 2014 and then it went to the Electoral College. Not really, but a legislative vote because neither candidate got 50%. But 2022, looking at the list here, there's a number of people that potentially could run in 2022. And considering that Patrick Leahy hasn't announced fully whether or not he's going to run, I think that he could be next on the potential retirement list just simply because of his seniority in the Senate, 9 terms. But he would not be the oldest senator by far. The next one I'm going to talk about is actually one of the older senators in the United States Senate, and actually might be the oldest. So Chuck Grassley is 88 years old today. I think actually turning 88 this year, will be 89 in time for 2022. I think he's a September baby. Let's check, actually, because that's cool. Let's see, scrolling down. He was born on, September. So he will be 89, but he's 87 right now. That doesn't really make the case any better, right? But looking at Iowa, he was loved here. He is loved here. In 2016, he won by a very large amount. In 2010, he won by a very large amount. 2004, 1998, 1992, 1986, it goes on. He's, main rundown, he's never been in a competitive position. But now, he could be. Why? The voters here don't want him to run. The voters do not want him to run. We see that the voters in here are saying, don't run for an 8th term. you're old, you don't need to be in the Senate. And, that's just putting it very frankly. Age is a very important thing when it comes down to how people are going to vote. And it's different than a 9th term in Vermont because Patrick Leahy was a senator before Chuck Grassley. And, looking at Chuck Grassley's history in the state of Iowa, I kid you not, he has been representing Iowa in one way or another for a third of the state's history. A third of the state's history. So 35%, actually more than that, 35% of the state's existence, Chuck Grassley has been in office in Iowa in one way or another. Isn't that interesting, right? So we will see. He's filed paperwork, but again, right now, filing paperwork doesn't mean much. And I truly think that the next Republican to retire, if any, could be Chuck Grassley. But he said that he won't tell us until 8 months to a year before the election, so we probably won't know until around November time period. But I do think that if anyone on the Republican side is next to retire, it will be him. Now, the next one I would say is a senator from Vermont. Senator Ron Johnson, someone who has been a very big proponent of President Trump, a very big critic of the Democratic Party, and a very big proponent of the election fraud claims across the country. He is up in 2022, and I don't think that he's going to have a sure re-election. Looking at what happened in 2016, he got lucky, right? He won more than Donald Trump, sure, but the Democratic Party re-ran their failed candidate, I would say, from 2010. I mean, you don't tell the voters, we rejected you, so we're going to bring you back, and, just vote for them, right? Just because he's the former senator. And while I understand that Russ Feingold, some Democrats thought was definitely a better senator than Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson was able to run on this platform and, on top of that, partially ride Donald Trump's coattails. Because if Hillary Clinton had truly won the state by what she was expected to, we're talking 6, 7, 8 points, Ron Johnson would not be a senator today. But looking at 2022, it looks as if so far, not only has he not filed the paperwork, but he already promised to retire before. And that's the difference here. With the rest of these Republicans, like Chuck Grassley and Patrick Leahy, they did not promise to retire. But what Ron Johnson told the voters was that if he was elected in 2016, he would not seek a third term. This is his third term. This is not, 8th, 9th term. But he said he wouldn't do it. So for a long time here, he was in the decline to run category. But then he changed his mind leading into the 2020 election. And then after it was questioned and said, while retirement, something that I floated before is something that seems to be my most probable path at this point. I made that promise under the assumption the Democratic Party would not have a trifecta. However, in the beginning, as you heard, he said that seems to be his most probable path moving forward, which means retirement could very well be next. On top of that, he's going to be attacked for this. When you say you're not going to run for something and then you run for something, you're going to get blowback for this. This is not a House of Cards situation. He can't really spin this in a positive light. The same way Steve Bullock had trouble for a long period of time saying, I'm not going to run for Senate. I'm running for president. If I lose the primary, that's it. I'm not running for Senate, right? And then was coerced by many top Democratic officials to run for Senate. They got the race close. Not close enough, but they still got it close. And I think that with Ron Johnson here, I think that because he made that promise, voters are going to remember that. On top of that, it's a Biden state. That's the thing. It's not some solid red state where he can make these boisterous claims of election fraud and be fine. We're not talking about him being primaried here. We're talking about him losing a general election because of these claims, because of his intention to vote against the certification of certain states and then ultimately changing his mind as a result of the Capitol riots. I mean, looking at Ron Johnson here, he's one of the more extreme Republicans from a not-so-extreme state, to say the least. And I think that Wisconsin is certainly going to have a Democratic opponent here that will give him a run for his money. And it'll be very interesting. But I think that if he decides not to run, that could also be a very smart move, because then he can say, I left on my own accord. Because I do think that if he does decide to run, there's a very real possibility he loses. So that's 8 retirements so far. And the final one actually comes from this CNN article that I showed you guys, I think, a month or two back. And it's from the state of South Dakota. Now, the reason why I think that this is going to be interesting is because South Dakota could potentially see a primary for this Senator John Thune from the state. And he is someone who has been closely working with Mitch McConnell. Donald Trump actually promised that John Thune will be primaried, but Kristi Noem said that she will not run for this seat. It looks as if she might be trying to gear up for 2024, and of course, running for re-election as governor of the state of South Dakota. But Donald Trump pretty much built this narrative that John Thune should be primaried because of his reluctance to support President Trump in the Senate. And He's someone who was, elected in 2016 by a large margin. We're talking, 70% of the vote. 70% of the vote. 2010, he won with 100% of the vote, not even contested. So looking at 2022, he would obviously be a shoo-in for re-election, but he could potentially see a primary. But if Kristi Noem, I am sorry, I have been pronouncing her name wrong. Kristi Noem, I need to get used to that. I've been pronouncing her name wrong. I know someone's already commented it because I said it around a minute ago. Sorry about that. I need to get used to saying her name is Kristi Noem. I've just been saying Noem for a long time. It is Kristi Noem. But John Thune, if he doesn't see her as an opponent, he probably won't lose the primary. But Donald Trump might actually come up here and oppose him because he's a very high-ranking official within the GOP, and yet he still won't, quote-unquote, back the president. What he really means is vote for the decertification of certain states. But overall, I think that if John Thune sees there's a realistic threat of a primary, the worst way to be ousted as an incumbent is not through the general, but through a primary, because then your own voters say they don't want you. It's not that the Democratic or Republican coalition was able to build up a robust base that was able to drive me out by 1,000 through hundreds of votes, right? Just a few percentage points. No, we're talking about you being ousted in a primary, which means not only did the opposition party not want you, but neither did your own party, which means you're one of the most unpopular members, and it's just honestly a very embarrassing way to go out. And looking at the Senate, looking at John Thune here, I think that if it's not Kristi Noem, it's not going to be feasible, but I think that Donald Trump still might try to get out his revenge in one way or another, and that could be just by fielding a candidate. So overall, the potential retirements bring us up to 9, 8 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and that could be a very major story if we see all of these follow through. So far, we know 5 are absolute. In the order that I think they would go, I would say, let me think actually. Yeah, Iowa, Vermont, Wisconsin, and South Dakota in the most likely to least likely. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.